Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our staff credential session. My name is Luke Dillon from the Maryland State Department of Education. We're going to be starting momentarily. Corey, if you could please go to the next slide, and this will go over our technology roles for today. If everyone would please put their name and their office or LEA in the chat box. We are going to be taking attendance today, and we will be recording this session, and we'll be starting momentarily. Thank you for joining us.
All right, good morning again, everyone. I am Shana Edmond, the Education Program Supervisor in the Title I office. I am also the point of contact for several school systems here in Maryland. And I would like to welcome my presenters. Next is Kelly Meadows. Would you like to introduce yourself, Kelly?
Good morning, I'm Kelly Meadows. I am the Director of Certification in the Division of Educator Certification and Program Approval at the MSDE.
Thank you, Kelly. And my colleague, Luke Dillon.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we're going to have a really worthwhile session today with a lot of great information. I am a Title I Educational Program Specialist and School Improvement Specialist in the MSDE Office of Title I. It's great to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. We have a wide array of school systems here for staff credentials, and we have the support from our certification office. And I'll hand it over to Luke for our technology norms.
Thank you, Shana. Again, if everyone could please mute themselves. As mentioned, some of us have just joined us. If you could, please, if you haven't already, type your name and LEA or office at MSDE into the chat box for attendance purposes. If you have any questions today, we'll also be pausing throughout the presentation, and we do have some time at the end set aside for questions, so you can place questions in the chat box. We may not be able to get through all questions today. However, we will follow up with you individually if we're not unable to answer your questions today. And I did want to let everybody know that this session will be recorded today. Or you can go to the next slide. Our session outcomes today are that all the participants will have received an overview of the types of certification in Maryland and the implications for Title I schools. They will have received resources and strategies from our certification office to support recruitment and retention efforts, and discussed innovative strategies for LEAs to eliminate disparities and increase teacher recruitment and retention efforts. Our session today will help build capacity for continuous learning. We understand that this pandemic has brought a lot of stress and anxiousness and uncertainty to our entire nation. And it's our goal as MSDE to support each of you as LEA partners across the state. So we really thank you for being here with us today, and we hope that this information will be of value. Today, we're going to be unpacking some of the staff credentials requirements as they pertain to Title I. And I'm just really excited to have Kelly Meadows today with us. She's our Director of Certification, and we have some really great information which is really going to help your LEAs and your Title I schools. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Kelly Meadows, Director of Certification from the Division of Educator Certification and Program Approval. Thank you, Kelly.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure to be here. All right, Corey, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So we're going to start today. I think You know, unfortunately, because I'm so enmeshed in certification, sometimes I have to force myself to take a step back and realize that not everybody, you know, lives, eats, and breathes this stuff. So this slide is all about kind of going back to the basics and making sure that everyone understands the options in Maryland for professional certification. And also, you're going to see in the next slide that we're going to talk about the difference between professional certification and conditional certification. So to start with the professional educator certificates, there are 3 in our state. And what's not on this slide, which you may see if you are doing the hiring, is also called a professional eligibility certificate or a PEC. And that's a good thing because a PEC means that the individual has met the qualifications for a professional certificate. So once they're hired, they're going to get either the first thing that you see on this slide, which is a standard professional certificate, and in most cases, that's what they're going to get. Or maybe they're coming to us from another state, and by the time they get to you, they actually can advance to that advanced professional certificate. So the PEC is a good thing when you see that during hiring. Once you get that person in, you're going to be working toward a professional certificate. That's the goal here, right? So the first professional certificate in Maryland is called the Standard Professional 1. It is a 5-year certificate. In fact, all of our professional certificates are valid for 5 years, and you have to move from the 1 to the 2. Now, there are some exceptions. There's always some exceptions, but I'm not going to get into the weeds today. If you feel like there may be an exception for renewing the SPC 1, then you're going to work with your Office of Certification at the local level. So today we're kind of just going to stay high level. So you've got the Standard Professional Certificate 1. It's valid for 5 years. And in order to move to that Standard Professional 2, you're going to have to submit 3 years of satisfactory school-related experience. So hopefully you've earned that on your SPC 1, as well as 6 semester hours of what we call acceptable credit. And at this point in someone's career, they're really going to already be working toward that APC. So that acceptable credit hopefully is helping them move toward that credential and not just something extra. It could be something extra, that's doable, but we really want to start thinking about that advanced credential immediately upon the issuance of the SPC 1. So once you move to that SPC 2, again, you have another 5 years, and again, you must advance to the advanced professional certificate. So you have 10 years. Basically, from the issuance of the SPC 1 to get to that advanced credential. So how do you get to the advanced credential? What you're looking for is, again, those 3 years of satisfactory experience, which hopefully they've already earned. It can be the same 3 years that they used to go from the SPC 1 to the SPC 2. 6 semester hours of acceptable credit, which hopefully is toward one of the 3 options that you see on the bottom right. So you can either have a master's degree, which does need to be related to public school education, which I can make an argument for most master's degrees. There are some that we wouldn't take, but it's a really wide variety. You can have a master's equivalent, which is 36 semester hours of credit. Or if they've gone and gotten their national board certification, they can come in that way as long as they have some additional graduate coursework. They need 12 credits of graduate coursework. So those are the 3 ways in which you can earn the advanced credential. So that is kind of the hierarchy in Maryland. And again, we do force our educators to advance. Are there any questions about these professional certificates before we move on? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about non-professional educator certificate. And I'm just going to ask you to please mute your mic if you're not speaking, but if you have a question, certainly ask. So there are 3. There used to be 2, and now all of a sudden there are 3 non-professional educator certificates in Maryland. And the one that you're probably most familiar with is the conditional certificate. So a conditional certificate is valid for 2 years and can be renewed on one occasion for a total of 4 years if they meet the renewal requirements. And the purpose of this conditional certificate is to fill a position that you cannot fill with a professionally certified individual. And the purpose of the certificate is it's a credential that allows someone to be in the classroom while they are working toward the requirements for professional certification. So I can't recall, I apologize, I can't recall if there's a renewal slide, so I'm just going to talk about it here. So in order to get from the first issue conditional certificate to that renewed conditional certificate, an individual does have to submit 12 semester hours of credit toward their plan for professional certification, whether they're enrolled in a program that leads to certification or whether they're going the route of transcript analysis. They have to be working toward it. And they need a minimum of 12 of those credits, as well as a basic skills assessment measure. And as long as they've completed those 2 pieces, they can go ahead and they can renew that conditional and have the full 4 years. Most individuals require the full 4 years unless they're really working hard. So it's just important if you're in the position to kind of hiring and counseling that person to make sure that they're getting those 12 credits in that basic skills measure before their 2 years is up so that you don't have to lose them. So that's the conditional certificate. Similar, new, is the emergency certificate. The emergency certificate is similar in that it is not a professional certificate. It is issued to someone who, because of the state of emergency, is not able to meet the full professional eligibility criteria. And so we know during this pandemic, at least in the beginning, our testing centers were closed. We had to pull interns out of the classroom, and it took a minute for, the educator preparation programs to kind of problem solve and figure out how to do that virtually. And we realized that, we recognized that, and immediately we put this into place as an emergency regulation. And basically what it says is there's this emergency credential that the superintendent can authorize employers to issue. Just like the conditional, it's completely based on employment. So it's not like someone's coming to our office at MSDE and saying, I'd like an emergency certificate so I can go apply for a job. The job has to come first. So the emergency certificate can be issued to anyone who's finished all of their coursework requirements, but may still need tests or a clinical experience. And there's a regulation that outlines what that is. There has been some confusion around the emergency certificate and dates and how long it's good for. And I think it's stemming from the fact that the emergency certificate came about in an emergency regulation. And so there's a lot of emergencies going on there. And so there are dates associated with the emergency regulation. So if you heard like a November 20-something date, that completely had to do with the regulation itself, nothing to do with the certificate. And that's actually off the table. You can just forget that date because we went through the regular promulgation process, and this is now a bona fide regular regulation. It's not in an emergency status anymore. It's going to live in COMAR until it doesn't anymore, until we repeal it. So don't worry about that date. The important thing that you need to understand about this certificate and its validity is it is valid for 6 months from the date that the state of emergency is lifted. So whether it's issued today or in December, in January, if the state of emergency is lifted, the clock starts ticking and that individual has 6 additional months from that date to do what they need to do to get that professional certificate. I will tell you that the Praxis, the ETS has offered a Praxis at Home series that launched in the beginning of June. And not all tests are available, but a lot of them are. And assessment centers have also been open since June. Not all of them. And sometimes, depending on the county, they may close and reopen based on the guidance from that county's health department. But there are assessments available. So don't think that it's not an option right now, because it is for some. So that's the emergency certificate. And then finally, we have a resident teacher certificate. So for those of you that are working in counties like PG or Baltimore City or Anne Arundel, Montgomery, that are lucky enough to have resident teacher programs in your county, this certificate is specific to the candidates that are enrolled in those programs. It's a 2-year certificate. It is non-renewable. It is issued specifically for the individual as they do their residency portion of that program. So those are the non-professional educator certificates. Again, different than the professional educator certificates because individuals have not met the requirements for professional certification in Maryland, but these credentials do allow them to be placed as a teacher of record in the classroom because they are certificates in Maryland. They're just not professional. So I see a hand. I see Nicole is raising her hand and I can only see 8 people. So if anyone else is raising their hand, I can't see them. So feel free to just unmic or throw something in the chat so I know that you have a question. But go ahead, Nicole.
Well, this question was easier to ask just verbally, but I'm wondering if the emergency certification, can that apply to long-term subs? Can a superintendent apply that to a long-term sub? Like if we're partnering with a university with interns and such in order to possibly fill like virtual only classrooms, can the superintendent provide an emergency certification for that so that they're deemed certified, we'll say?
I think I understand your question. So the emergency certificate, and I'm sorry, I don't have the reg up for you, and I'm trying to remember the exact language. And it is COMAR 13A 120114, if anyone wants to look at the citation. But it is only for an employed, I'm trying to remember exactly what the language looks like. Because what I need to do is look at the language to see if anything would prevent it, Nicole. And I want to look at the language before I answer your question. I'm thinking that it's going to be up to your superintendent. The idea of the emergency certificate was that it would be issued as a stopgap measure. So if the long-term substitute doesn't have to be certified, I'm not really sure why they would use this credential. I'm thinking I think it's Montgomery County, and Nicole, I apologize, I don't know if you're from Montgomery County, but I feel like Montgomery County requires their substitutes to hold a certificate for a certain level of pay. So I'm not really sure if that would be a reason. But that's not really the intention of the certificate. With that being said, I'd have to look at the language to see if anything prevented that. But it would have to be issued at the local level, and locals typically do not issue certificates to long-term subs. They would send us to us, and they would be treated as members of the public because they don't have a contract. Really, under contract is what separates, does MSDE handle them or does the LSS handle them? Are you under contract? And so if long-term subs aren't under contract, then they wouldn't really go through the local. They wouldn't go through their employer. But we can talk offline if you want to kind of flesh that out a little bit more. Any other questions about non-professional certificates? All right, next slide, please. Okay, so I really launched into this already. Did I miss anything? I don't believe so. Last call for questions on the emergency certificate. All right, next slide, please. Okay. All right, so I talked a little bit about this already, but I wanted to make sure we put a graphic, and I know it's small, so I apologize, but we put a graphic on this slide, which I'm really glad we did, because one of the questions that and it is not a silly question. I've had colleagues at the MSDE ask me this question who have been in education for years and years and years, so I never take it for granted that people understand how to read a Maryland Educator Certificate. So what I want to point out is that on the certificate, in the middle of the certificate where it says certification areas, these are the areas that an individual has met the qualifications to teach, or if it's a specialist or administrator area, you're going to find them there too. for a professional certificate. So under certificate area, if it says, math 7 through 12 and biology 7 through 12, then those are the areas in which they have met their certification requirements. The bottom portion that says ancillary credits is not an extension of that. And so you can either see reading there or special education there. And I cannot tell you how many people I have come across who think that they can teach reading or teach special education because they see that terminology under ancillary credits, and that is not the case. Ancillary credits are specific semester hours of credit that one takes in that area. So for this example, it says reading 12, and it means that they have 12 credits of reading. And the reason that we put this on the certificate is because there are regulatory requirements for teachers to have a certain number of hours of reading. And there are regulatory requirements for specialists and administrators to have a single class in special education. So that is the difference between those two sections of the certificate. If you are looking at a conditional certificate or an emergency certificate, you're only going to see one single area under certification areas because you can only be working toward one area of certification to begin with, right? So you have to earn that first credential, and then you can start thinking about all of the other things you're going to earn via endorsement. So if you've got someone that you've hired and you've asked them to teach biology and they have a conditional certificate in biology, that doesn't mean that you can say, you know what, I also want them to teach social studies, so can you add social studies too? You cannot add more than one area to a conditional certificate. And that's a big difference between a professional credential and a non-professional credential is that, if you think about it, you can only have a plan for one certification at a time, right? So you're only going to see one there. Any questions, final questions about professional versus non-professional?
So Kelly, I do have a question.
Okay.
Okay, so my question is, so I'm understanding the two types of certificates, professional and non-professional. As it pertains to Title I, does it mean that the teacher that is possessing a non-professional, they are not fully certified under the Title I programmatic requirements?
And we're actually going to get to that in the next slide. But yes, you're correct. If they do not have a professional certificate, then they do not meet the full state licensure requirements.
For a professional certificate.
Right.
Okay, so, I'll wait till the next slide. Okay, thank you.
All right, next slide, please.
All right, so what implications does all of this mean for Title I schools? And so Kelly did an excellent job clarifying a lot of the emergency requirements for that particular certificate. But ESSA does require that all teachers working in a Title I targeted assistance or school-wide school meet state certification and licensure requirements. And sometimes there is some confusion over whether only directed Title I salaried staff need to meet those requirements. But the school is funded with Title I grant funds, therefore all teachers need to meet these requirements. And so that's what I was reiterating, that they must have a professional certificate. If not, we've made flexibilities where you still have to do the parent rights to know, you still have to get the letter out within 4 weeks. You should be collaborating with the Human Resource Office to ensure that the teachers are on an action plan. And so our office is working on guidance to dispel any myths or confusion regarding the standard certificates or professional certificates, I should say, from our MSD certification office and how that applies to Title I schools. But at this time, the requirements are still the same. So if a teacher does not hold a professional certificate, then we have accepted waivers and we have accepted action plans that level out what the Human Resource Office, in collaboration with the Title I office, to ensure that the regulations are being followed. So Corey, if you go to the next slide. The next slide has a question that actually came in from the field. And that question was, how do we ensure compliance with staffing and how do we provide services? And so the expectations for providing the services portion, that's all referenced in our Title I guidance document. That's in our school-wide section, that's in our targeted assistance section, and that we just really have to ensure that you all are following your written processes as outlined in your application. But as far as ensuring compliance, you're definitely collaborating with HR, and that can be achieved by making sure that your certificates are up to date and that they're on file, ensuring that the Human Resource Office are running reports regularly, and ensuring that teachers are placed in their content area for teacher assignments with real intentional practices. And we do get a lot of feedback that many of our school systems are providing a myriad of supports to new educators. And so there are a plethora of ways to ensure compliance, but that are collaboration with HR and then leaning on our MSD Title I office, whether it's paraprofessional requirements, whether it's any of the emergency certificates or temporary certificates that we refer to them as, then we are your first resource as far as allowability and flexibilities that can be made. But since there has been no additional waivers from the United States Department of Education and from our MSDE office, we are still abiding by the most recent emergency certificate that relates to COVID-19. There's another question that came in, Corey, if you go to the next slide, that came in from some of our LEAs as we were gathering input for today's session. And it was, can Title I funded staff be used to perform duties outside of the grant's mandates? And so that answer will most likely never change. That answer is no, and they must perform those duties as required by ESSA. So if your school systems are making decisions regarding Title I funded staff, and you are within the Title I office and you're not at the table, then definitely communicate those efforts. And if we can support you in any way to review that information with the powers that be, because there are a lot of decisions that impact Title I schools, and sometimes our coordinators and our Title I staff are not at the table. But that fluid communication with other offices is going to be really important. But that flexibility does not exist. So Title I funded staff are still expected to perform the duties required by ESSA. Corey, you can go to the next slide. And so we have really tried our best within the confines of the law, because we still are stewards of these federal funds. And so we have accepted temporary waivers, and we've granted quite a few that have been received by the MSD Title I office. And these requests are for extenuating circumstances with staffing and credentials. And so they have been around paraprofessional qualifications and teacher certificates. And so often when we, our approach is usually through a point of contact, that there's some dialogue regarding the challenges that the school system is having regarding hiring of qualified staff or trying to sustain or maintain certification statutes with current staff. And so the waivers that come in go directly to our MSD Title I Director, Paula Harris, and they are from the LEA Title I coordinator, and they're signed on letterhead from that coordinator. And they really outline the need for the request. And most often, they have data to support the request. They may include strategies and activities that have taken place to prevent this from happening. And it also typically explains the impact on students in Title I schools. And so for this year here, as I stated, we have received waivers regarding paraprofessionals, regarding teachers, and even in non-publics. So it's important to understand that even in our non-public settings, the Title I requirements still remain true. And so we have even accepted waiver requests and approved waiver requests for teachers in non-publics that are having a difficult time meeting all of the requirements for a professional certificate. So I'll pause there for any questions. So I see in the chat box, letters will need to go out for all non-professional certifications, including conditional and ditto. So the answer to that is yes. I'll add that to the chat box.
All right, you can go to the next slide, Corey.
So if there aren't any questions, we have a Padlet in the chat box, and we really, really would like to hear from you because with you all in the field doing this work, we want to make sure that we are giving opportunities and platforms for your innovative strategies that has actually been working with staff credentials and requirements. And so I know collaboration does exist throughout the state with human resource offices. And it's oftentimes that our coordinators have to go back to the basics and review Title I requirements and ensuring our LEAs are meeting those requirements. And so that collaboration is important. But we want to hear from you on the Padlet about any innovative strategies that have been working to ensure compliance for our Title I staff. And so within the Padlet, you'll see general strategies for urban LEAs, suburban LEAs, and rural LEAs. So if you could just add any strategies that you've been using as it's described in your LEA. We'll take a minute to do that and discuss it.
We're trying as much as we can with this platform to provide interactivity, and we've particularly heard from rural counties that they would like an opportunity to share with other rural counties about some of the specific issues that are impacting them with staff credentials. And so there's a column for rural, urban, and suburban, and then a general column also. So we'll look forward to hearing some of the ideas that are working in your LEA. And if you can, Corey, there's a link right on the PowerPoint slide. If you could click on that momentarily. We don't have a lot of time for this because there's more content to come, but we can use that. Or LEAs also, again, have in the chat box, and I'll paste it again, the link here as well. So I see Nicole has shared about the teacher in residency opportunities for teachers in their county. Very nice. Do we have any suburban or urban LEAs with us that want to add to their column? You can also post it in our chat box as well. Retired teachers are returning is another strategy that was shared. Excellent. And we'll keep this Padlet up over the next day or so that folks can return to it. Nan from Worcester County has shared that they have a professional development affiliation with Salisbury University to recruit new teachers. Excellent. Thank you very much to everyone that shared. Corey, you can go to the next slide. We're now going to be transitioning because we've gotten input from the field that folks want some strategies about recruitment and retention strategies to help fill the gaps, because we do know that these are trying times. And Kelly has prepared some really great information that she's going to be sharing now about you can effectively recruit staff to your LEA and also keep them and retain them.
Next slide, please. Okay, so I would like to share some recruitment efforts that we're taking at the state level. I'll preface this by saying I certainly don't have the magic bullet. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you how we can stop this critical shortage and recruit, and retain more importantly. And I'm going to talk more on the recruitment side. And just to give you a little bit of background, in 2018, it was 17 or 18, I apologize, I can't remember. A bill came out that required the Maryland State Department of Education to form a steering committee. And that steering committee was specific who needed to be on that steering committee to include our institutions of higher education that have educator preparation programs, specifically our historically Black colleges and universities, a student from one of those universities, a faculty from one of those universities. There were about 5 people that it said had to be on the steering committee, and then we opened that up and invited a larger body. We brought in the Office of Maryland Tourism, the Maryland Higher Education Commission, and we all sat down and we looked at this statute that was new that basically said, you've got to have a digital recruitment campaign. And we said, all right, how are we going to do this? So for the past 2 years, we have been in these efforts. And the first thing that I want to highlight is the Teach in Maryland website. So you may not know this exists. And so we're constantly trying to kind of push this out there, spread the word. If you Google Teach in Maryland or Teaching Maryland or Maryland certification, hopefully this site is one of the first sites that pops up. But it's still relatively new within the last year. So it's still relatively unknown. So teach.in.maryland.gov is a great resource for you. And one of the reasons I wanted to share this with you today is because we are always looking for partnerships, right? So part of what this website is for is talking about incentives. You know, maybe there are incentives related to teaching in Title I schools that you want to highlight on this website. Certainly work with Luke, work with Shanna, let's get it on there. Maybe you're having a special recruitment fair in your county that you want us to highlight on our website. Let's do it. There's a whole section on contacts for local school systems, and it goes right to the HR offices of those systems. And I know there are some HR directors that I work with on this call, and you know, some of them, like I don't know if Jeff Grafton is in this session, but Jeff said, put me, I want to be the person. And so guess what? For Dorchester, Jeff's contact information is there. So we're going to work with you to make sure that that link is going and that phone number is for the person that best suits hiring, recruiting efforts in your county. We have complete control of this website. I am the webmaster, and there are a couple other webmasters. So it's not like we have to go through this big hullabaloo to get something changed. Like, you just tell me and we'll change it. And so that really is the purpose of this website. Let's show the public, whether it's someone that's considering a career change, whether it's someone that's getting ready to graduate, or someone that's coming into Maryland, or maybe looking to relocate and they're kind of looking at their options. Let's make sure they know how wonderful it could be to teach in Maryland. So check out the website, and if you have any feedback, I'm all for it. There's some really great stories on there from some educators from around the state. That I really enjoy that part of the website. So just check it out and let me know what you think. So in addition to the Teach in Maryland website, we have partnered with Radio One, and Radio One is the company 92Q in Baltimore, and I can never remember the radio station in Washington, but there's also a station in Washington. So we've partnered with Radio One. We've had a really good partnership with them over the last couple of years. We worked specifically with some of their DJ personalities. Pork Chop has been a part of this campaign for the last 2 years, and Persia Nicole has been a part of this particular effort. And so what happens is these personalities will talk about Teach in Maryland campaign on their own broadcast. There are social media videos that they boost out on their Instagram, on their Facebook for us older people that may be career changers. And this past year, we've kind of ratcheted up a little bit, and we have been doing, and I can never remember the exact terminology, but in a nutshell, like if you're watching television through like an app, like don't think Netflix, but think more like Hulu. So like if you're watching through Hulu and you know that sometimes you get these breaks and you get like a 20-second advertisement. So now we've got those breaks. We have some Teach in Maryland advertisements that are breaking into that digital media. So that's been exciting. And then the last thing we just did, which we really loved, we were an exclusive sponsor, not exclusive. because there was another one. We were one of the highlighted sponsors of a virtual prom that Radio 1 held for both the Baltimore and Washington areas. And so, of course, we have a lot of kids that weren't able to attend their proms in May, their senior proms. And so Radio 1 worked with both of those urban areas to bring in entertainment, and they had a live virtual prom that anyone could log into, and Teach in Maryland was highlighted throughout the entire thing. So that was really exciting. So those are some of the highlights. And then we also have the Retire Rehire program. And this is a program that's been around forever. And what I would say about this is there are opportunities to rehire recently retired teachers and administrators. And if you are not familiar with this program, I urge you to speak with your HR office because they are familiar with this program. And if your HR office has any questions about the parameters of this program, please reach out to my office because there is a way to do this, and it could help fill vacancies in your Title I schools. Next slide.
All right, we're getting short on time, so I'm going to move through this very quickly. Title I are familiar with the 3 staff credentials disparities. Next slide. One that came up via some questions from the local field is particularly around ineffective teacher disparities. This year, MSDE has put in place that LEAs are expected to address disparities with a specific focus on how the support will differ for schools that receive Title I. Next slide. Here are some great strategies compiled. I want to highlight one particularly from my county public schools that's providing earlier on-site interview options in Title I schools. Other interviews are held in high school gyms or auditoriums for non-Title I schools, but Title I schools get to have earlier interview options. Also, the paraprofessional, and we'll have more information about this later, and we will be sharing this PowerPoint with you as well, so you'll have it. Next slide. Next slide, please. Up next, we have the additional Session 2 breakout sessions. That information is in the chat box here for you. So please do select the next session that you'd like to attend, either progress monitoring or fiscal accountability. They're excellent sessions. And Shana, I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
All right, Corey, you can go to the next slide. Definitely want to take an opportunity to thank Kelly again as Director of the Certification Office at MSDE for taking time out to join us at our administrative meeting. And so Kelly is accepting, calls from the local school systems, and emails from the local school systems regarding certification requirements. All Title I related questions should first start with your Title I point of contact. But Luke and I are happy to follow up with any specific questions regarding this presentation. You can email us and we'll get back to you as well. So we look forward to hearing from you, and you can definitely take this information back to your Human Resource Office and further those collaborative efforts. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you all. And Kelly, thank you so much for co-presenting today.
My pleasure.